sweeping topic, the environment. I mean, if we talk about, you know, all the issues on planet Earth today that affect, of course, not just America, but, you know, all global issues. We're at terrorism, we're at, you know, dependence on fuel, and a lot of it reaches back to the issue of the environment. We have 7 billion people living on the planet. We're using a lot of resources. We are, you know, conscious of water. What do they say? That the next world war is going to be over water and our misuse of these resources. So, you know, President Trump just this week signed yet another executive order, and this one was to undo some of the policies that Obama had put in place in terms of curbing carbon emissions, etc. You know what's happening with the pipeline up in North Dakota. So I don't pretend for an instant to have any true scientific knowledge or to be a, you know, a person day to day deeply involved, but I surely care about planet Earth. I was involved in a symposium just a few years ago with 4 of the top scientists, from the people who were down in the 30,000-foot trenches of the ocean to an astronaut, you know, discovering space, to people involved with fracking and stopping fracking. So we could go in a million directions today, but what most scientists feel is not only that the human population is affecting negatively what's happening with our resources and our future, especially global warming, climate change. That's where we want to go today. And if you know a lot about other issues of the environment, please write in. And please, as we're talking today, share. Go right down to the bottom of your screen there, hit share, bring your friends into this conversation. The more people and the more wide the conversation goes, the more lively. So, you know, you hear it every day that how can we ignore the hardcore science? There aren't people, there aren't environmentalists and biologists, you know, or anybody in the oceanographers, glaciologist. We could go down many, many routes of science today. Nobody would tell you, no, we're just in one of the ups and downs, the rises and the falls of the climate of planet Earth. I mean, my gosh, in whatever era that was, there were several ice ages. There were the heat ages. We walked out of Africa to get away from that heat. We are not in one of those cycles. We, the human race, are making our planet ill, and we're making it too hot. I think the image that tugs at the heartstrings the most are the polar bears and the penguins and the walruses in the Arctic losing their ice. That, you know, it was evidently 100 years. So if we take 2005 and go back 100 years to 1905, the Earth rose, the surface temperature, which is counting the methane gases and carbon dioxide, which are important for human life. We need methane. We need carbon dioxide. But once we start deforestation, and so we're taking away trees, we have less carbon dioxide. Once we start burning huge amounts of refuse and plastics, and all kinds of garbage, we're creating all kinds of methane, which is creating a blanket over the Earth. And we see the Arctic, and we see the polar ice melting. This is not some cycle that's just going to bounce back in another 20, 25 years. We are going down a road, and unless many of us make some demands and push for change and push for respect of our planet, we're going into the oceans rising. That polar ice and that Antarctic ice melt, and now the oceans of the world start swelling, and they start filling with fresh water, to put it as crudely and probably scientifically incorrectly as I can. I saw a glaciologist give a lecture a few weeks ago. He had a map of the whole world and where all the cities rest. And as we know, almost all cities are on the coasts. Look at Australia. Very, very little population across the whole continent of Australia. And the same with us. We have many more population, you know, settlements along our coast. Well, if the seas by the end of this century, and some people predict that this is not at all unreasonable, if we go at the exact same surface temperature rise like NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration feels, and so does NASA, and so does the Climate Research Unit. A lot of these people who follow the climate and global warming every single day say that it's not unreasonable. At the end of the century, the oceans are going to rise by 8 feet. That would mean that at minimum 6 million American homes and infrastructure buildings along our coast would be devastated, would be wiped out by simply that new table of water. So there are all kinds of things published. You can look up every day what you can do. You know, often we get overwhelmed. We think, well, that's such a macro problem. How can my little effort do anything for it? But it can. You use less water, you use less hot water, so you don't have to be using the energy sources that heat water. Just there are literally 100 things that you could do every day in your own life, in your own home, to help combat global warming. So let me look to see who we got here. I have to lean in a little bit.
I can try a comment from Beth
Tim,
Brooks.
go ahead. I can't read from here. Sorry.
No,
Sorry, everybody. It's my eyes or something.
Beth Brooks says, tonight I will be viewing a documentary at Southwestern University called Between Earth and Sky, Climate Change and Its Impact in Alaska. My nephew, Dr. David Weindorf, is the executive producer. Can't wait to learn more.
I think that sounds great. And I don't know if you know Beth. Beth is one of our epic walkers, went LA to San Diego, who lives down in Austin, Texas. Beth, it's so great to hear from you. I'd like to know if we can see, during this conversation, right back again and tell us if that film is going to be televised at some point or, be out for a mass audience, because I'm sure a lot of us would like to catch it. I was about to say, I hosted a few years ago at Yale University an evening with, many experts of planet Earth from different ways. And some of the people in the audience started asking, what can we do? And almost all of these people said, you don't really have to worry about planet Earth. What you have to worry about is the human race. How are we behaving? If the human race doesn't make it, so let's not get, too pessimistic, but, for any number of reasons, if we do not survive, planet Earth, the second the Homo sapiens stops abusing this beautiful planet of ours and we're gone, planet Earth is going to rebound virtually overnight. The rivers are going to run clean again. The Arctic will be restored again. So it's up to us, the stewards of this beautiful planet of ours, to make sure that doesn't happen on our watch. Gabby?
Yes, next is Michael Young. Says, I've noticed a difference in flooding just on the 7 years that I've been in Key West. Flagler will flood during a high tide now, and it didn't do that when I first moved here.
Yeah, you know what, Michael? First of all, hello. A number of citizens of Key West and the county commissioners and city commissioners, I mean, you're at zero sea level, right? I lived in Key West at the condo that's called the highest point on the island, and it's laughable. You stand on that point, and when you look down the street that way, the sea is right there at your eye level. So I think the highest point on the island is like 1 foot or 2 feet or something, and it's true. Any place that's there are places on Cape Cod. There are a number of places on our coastal shores that are very susceptible to rising seas. It's not like, it's going to take the 80 years to the end of this century that Key West might be flooding more and more and more with just plain global warming, not hurricane, disaster, anything else. Michael, thank you for writing in.
Ginger Garrett says, what differences did you notice in the oceans where you did your training and swims in the 70s as compared to the 2011-13 swims?
Ginger, good to hear from you. Ginger is an esteemed judge in the state of California. She's one of our Everwalkers. She has beautiful golden retriever dogs. And hold on, I'm going to get up and go away because I want to show you one picture. She sent me at one point. Let's see if you can see this. These, a couple of these guys are no longer with us, but take a look at her 4 dogs, and they were all wearing Extreme Dream t-shirts in honor of the Cuba swim. So Ginger, I have to tell you, I think it's one of the problems. Let's compare it to littering. You know, when I was a kid, so we're talking about the 50s and the 60s, you know, we would think nothing of throwing your gum out the window, drink a cup and just, you know, throw it on the sidewalk. And we were starting to learn that. Our teachers and our, you know, adults in our lives are saying, you don't think that makes a difference? So what is one little piece of gum going to do in this big, wide world where there are so many of us on this planet? What if everybody every day threw out a piece of gum, you know, onto the middle of the highway or, you know, out into your backyard? So we sort of, not that everybody follows the credo, but we sort of, we made a pact, you know, at least Americans did, that we're going to stop littering. But when you're out in that vast blue ocean, it almost feels like, well, it's untouchable. You know, we've read about that, you know, that plastic island. It's almost the size of a nation itself that's now floating in the Pacific because the currents have taken all the plastic refuse and swept them together into a, you know, a devastating, you know, ugly island out in the middle of our ocean. But we're sort of under the, like we used to be with the land, we're sort of under this misconception that nothing could really dirty that ocean. It's, you know, it's too big, it's huge, it's vast. But it's not true. Whenever you go, like after a storm up here on the California coast, if a huge storm has come through and now, you know, there's a lot of dredging and there's an undertow and the sand is pulled back and it reveals what comes up from the bottom of that ocean, it is just, will blow your mind what people have been throwing overboard. So when I'm swimming up on the surface of the azure blue Gulf Stream, I don't notice that, but I do notice that the jellyfish that used to swim only in southern oceans, devastating jellyfish, are now attracted. They're attracted to the refuse that we are allowed to throw out from steamships and freighters. Do you know that there's very little control, that a freighter can just buzz along across the Atlantic, Pacific, Indian Ocean and dump their refuse out into the big, beautiful ocean? There are very few controls and regulations over that. So a lot of that refuse and that is sort of thick, rich stuff has attracted jellyfish, you know, from all over, even southern oceans that never used to swim up near the equator. And oil spills. The big oil spill on the Gulf in 2010 drew millions of jellyfish and different phyla that were never up in those oceans before. So in some ways, when I was out there, Ginger, it was like still ideal perfection. Just blue, clean, pristine water. But we know better. We know better what, you know, that we're changing the ecosystem of the ocean, just as we're changing the ecosystem of our homes. Just as the oceans are rising, inland waterways are receding. There is less water in lakes. I mean, we see it here in Lake Mead, close to Las Vegas. It's alarming to see where the water table mark is on those rocks. I don't know, I hate to guess, but it seems to me it's 40 or 50 feet higher than where that water is. And that's not only drought, it has to do with the warming of the earth and that blanket of methane and carbon dioxide that we're creating. Who else wants to weigh in? Who can educate me on something? I'm sure you can.
Kathy Moreau says, I read there are sunken, sealed containers of medical waste in the ocean.
You know, I certainly can't comment on that, but we do know that there are, it's sort of become the, you know, the garbage pit of the world. We, of course, are sending garbage into outer space as well. There are orbits that are filled with garbage containers going around. So we could say, well, isn't space vast enough? Can't we pick an orbit or two and throw all our waste up there, better than having it in landfills? Landfills and the burning of what's in landfills, especially when you get to you know, electronics and plastics, creates huge levels of methane that contributes to this carbon footprint that we are now stepping on the earth with. But we could say, Space. We don't even know how vast it is. A month ago, they discovered 7 new planets and a new sun, a new star. And it basically told us, the astronomers who discovered those planets said, you know what this is really about? It's just an indication that we know nothing about space. We know nothing of how vast it is, how far it exists. Does it go to infinity? Well, you know, is there a curved edge to it? What's in it? What's the implication for us? We know absolutely nothing. So willy-nilly, and I'm sure it's a little more controlled than this, we just shoot up, you know, little missiles into space that take containers of waste and they just forevermore circle Earth in an orbit. Well, maybe one day we're going to wish that we hadn't crowded up space with all that garbage. And I'm sure the same is true for containers going underneath. But as to medical waste, I wouldn't deign to speak to that. I don't know. But thank you for bringing it up. I'm going to do some research on it as soon as we get off this call. Are you all sharing? Are you going down? Come on, bring your buddies in. Let's let's teach me something. Let's teach everybody something.
Lucas Sparks says, watching from Jacksonville Beach, Florida. I love watching you. Thank you. This is important to hear.
Lucas, we hear from you often. And I want to know when you're going to come walking with us. We're going to come do a couple of walks in Florida for sure. One is, I don't know if you know Lauren's kids. We talked about Lauren a couple of weeks ago. She's a U.S. Senator from the state of Florida. She has started, it's usually in the spring, but she just had twins. So she deserves a break. She's going to do the walk in the fall now, which we are going to do our big fall walk at Everwalk as well. And Lauren walks with a whole bunch of people from Key West all the way up to Tallahassee every year. So Bonnie and I are going to come and walk at least a couple days to support her and Lauren's kids and the issue of sexual abuse and of children in the state of Florida. Lucas, I want to meet you. I want you to come out and walk with us when we get there. And probably the walk Everwalk's going to do in Florida when we get down there is Key West to Miami. It's Key West is my home away from home, and we're going to walk that beautiful up to Homestead and into the hot Latin city of Miami at some point. So Lucas, you come walk with us, okay? Okay, let's get back to the environment. Who's got something?
Lois Ann Porter says, joining you. Oh, here. Next one. Well, let's finish. Lois Ann Porter said, are joining you for the Final Four in Dallas, Stanford playing in an hour.
Lois Ann, another epic of ours and a dear, dear friend of mine for a long, long time now. And she lives up in Northern California with her partner, Kathy, and they're big, huge Stanford women's basketball fans. Okay, Lois Ann, we're rooting for you and the Cardinal, okay? Thanks for tuning in. Talk to you soon, honey.
Lucas Sparks says he will. Thank you.
There you go, Lucas. I'm holding you to that. I'm writing that down right now. Lucas Sparks has just committed to walking with us whenever we're in Florida. Okay, Lucas. Done.
Gabriela Greco says, my concern is the animals. Did you guys see the article that's circulating on sea turtles? They're washing up on the shore completely wrapped in plastic and waste. I literally cried.
Yeah.
Then just the other day, there was a sea lion found on the shores of Martha's Vineyard completely submersed. They rescued him and he's okay, but my gosh, it's horrible.
It is horrible, Gabriela. Thank you for writing in. I got to do a documentary on the sea turtles down in Costa Rica at one point. It was just, it's one of those mind-boggling migration stories. So the entire clan of the green turtle, they live down off the Galapagos, right? And they mate very, very, very deep. There's, at least when I did this documentary, there had never been a filming of the mating of two of the turtles. And then the female on her own swims some 2,000 miles from the Galapagos up, and over to Costa Rica and finds the exact beach that all of her ancestors, female ancestors, mothers, had gone to. Not the beach down 200 yards that way or a quarter of a mile that way. That won't do. They have an instinct, and it's safe for them. They find that exact stretch of beach, and she crawls herself up there. And by the way, when she swims there, and people have filmed that, they mark them with a little harmless electronic tag on one of their flippers so they can see where they're swimming. They don't swim off to hunt and eat over there. If something comes in front of them and they have a chance to eat, they will eat, but they are on a mission to get to that beach. And as that beach, and of course this is happening for all kinds of animals, birds and reptiles and animals all over the world that have their ecosystem that works for them. When that turtle reaches that beach and now it's been eroded, or the water table, the ocean has risen and covered up that beach and it's no longer there, they're confused. They don't, just think of the moment and say, well, it's no big deal. I'll just swim 2 miles over to the east or the west and I'll climb up onto another beach to lay my eggs. They die because they're upset. Their system is not being received into the ecosystem that they're part of for thousands of years. So, yeah, I hear you, Gabriella. It is upsetting. And I started to say that picture of a polar bear, these big, beautiful, it's one of the most magnificent mammals on Earth. And to see them standing on a little piece that even their entire bodies can't fit. They have to put their paws so close together and they're looking furtively. They do swim, but they've got to get out on the ice as well. It's just, it tugs at our heartstrings to see that. So many animals are being affected by us heating up the globe. It's true.
Gabriella wrote, OMG, the polar bears, they ripped my soul out.
Yeah. There's a reason, I'm forgetting his name. I want to say Bill Nichols. It's something like that. I should have it right. I should have looked it up before this. I didn't know I was going to mention him, but he's a National Geographic photographer. He has been shooting the Arctic, living in the Arctic for most of his adult life, and he's done almost all the covers, the National Geographic covers, if they have anything to do with the Arctic. And he says, he doesn't want to think of it as exploitation because there's so much going on up there. There are lots of photographs to shoot, but he knows that the polar bear, the plight of the polar bear is what affects us. Those of us who don't live anywhere near the Arctic, it's easy for us to say, who cares about the Arctic? I mean, now very few people live there. If you told me something horrible is happening in Vermont, I'd take a look into it. And I certainly don't feel that way, but I'm just saying it's hard to get people to care about things that are supposedly far away from them. But we're learning, with the whole issue of global warming is that we have finally learned that this is a very small planet. And every weather pattern that we're changing with global warming, all the rising of the oceans, the rivers running dirty and affecting the animals and their ability to drink clean water, everything we're doing with our carbon footprint is affecting all of the Earth.
Cindy Lou says, last year I bought a tour to a reef in Tulum, and it's the saddest reef I've ever seen in my life. It was all gray and almost completely dead. I think we should inform ourselves about how not to harm our planet and look for other ways to avoid pollution. Right now the life is very fast and the industry looks for ideas to make everything more practical, but because of this we are generating more waste, which sadly ends up in the ocean.
Yeah, well, Cindy Lou, amen to that. I don't really say amen much, but it's just, even as an atheist, I find amen a perfect word. There's no other word that sums up right on. You couldn't say it better. Amen. I got a chance to dive the Great Barrier Reef. Let me think when that was. It was the year of the Olympic Games in Sydney, Australia, so that was 2000. And it was brilliant. The purples and the magentas and the blues and the cobalts and the greens and the yellows. I mean, I actually cried when unlike you cried to see the gray reef, down where you were off Tulum in Mexico. I cried to see the brilliance of those colors. And then I went back. I'm trying to think what year it was. I want to say probably it was around 2008. So it wasn't too much after 8 years. And in that short 8 years, I mean, usually evolution of the planet takes hundreds and then thousands and in some cases millions of years. But 8 short years later, everything had faded. The blues were not as rich a hue as they were before. So yeah, I mean, people will tell us that the coral reefs, and it's not just for our human gazing entertainment, the coral reefs are living organisms that are homes to to millions of animals around the world. They're part of that ocean ecosystem, and we are affecting them, desperately and quickly. It's alarming to see how quickly it's happening.
Stu Moore said Bill Hatcher, Nat Geo, question mark?
Know what, Stu? First of all, Stu, I'm going to call you my brother-in-law. You're not really my brother-in-law by blood, but Bonnie might as well be my sister, and you're her brother-in-law. So Stu is my dear heart. This is one brilliant guy who's a philosopher, and he came down to Key West, and there's a picture of Stu and I when I didn't make it one time, holding each other's shoulders and putting our foreheads right next to each other and looking each other's arms. And I have that photo in my office, Stu, and I look at it all the time. I just love you. But no, that's not his name. It's like Nichols. It's Paul.
It's another one. Bill Kurtzinger, Nat Geo?
No, it's now I just remembered it's Paul, and it's really close to Nichols. If it's not Nichols, it's Nicholson or Nicholas or something. But I think it's Paul. So anyway, Stu, I love you. Keep doing some research and let us know who that Nat Geo photographer is. Thank you. See you soon, Stewie.
Liz Ghani says wildlife photographer Michael Nick.
No, boy, but it's good to know all these good people. I'm sure it's Paul. Somebody look it up. Come on, you Google it while we're talking. I'm sure we'll get it in a minute.
Joanna King says, my next door neighbor doesn't recycle, and it kills me to see all the plastic and paper going out in their trash. I'm inspired to write to the borough here to re-educate my community on the importance of recycling or be fined. Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? Because look, I try to do my little bit, but I'm no angel. I don't live a perfect, no carbon footprint life, that's for sure. And how can I go shaming other people? We're at all different levels, right? And so, somebody might come to me and say, don't you know this is what you should be doing with your trash? You should be driving out to hazmat locations if you're throwing out even one little AA battery. So, I'm sure that I'm not even a quarter the way there of doing what I could, just living a daily life. But when you see somebody who's really not paying attention, who really doesn't believe that trash bin full of plastics is going to be a hardship, and doesn't know that they're not the only one. There are 7 billion of us, and how many people are keeping a bunch of plastics and shipping them out each week? So it's hard to do. It's sort of like when you see someone litter. It doesn't do any good to go up and be angry at them and shame them and say, oh, really? What, are you going to just leave that for the next person to pick up? Don't you know this is your planet Earth? It doesn't do any good, but somehow there's a way to talk to that neighbor. Somehow there's a way to gently tell, maybe find something they do better than you do. And you wish that you were up to speed with whatever that is they're doing. And then just say, do you have any idea what plastics going into landfills, etc., are doing? How much energy they take, how negative they are to the planet. Maybe there's a way, you can make an inroad over there. But you're doing the right thing is huge, and you're affecting one other person. To get them doing the right thing is huge. Thanks for writing in. Paul Nicklin.
Paul Nicklin, thank you. Who came through with that?
Stu, and then
Stewie.
Gabriella, and then Lorraine.
Gabriella, Lorraine. It's Paul Nicklin. So he was on this panel I was on, and we were all talking about, Cheryl Strayed was on the panel, so she had just written Wild, and she was talking about walking the entire, California crest mountains, and I had just done the Cuba swim, so I was talking about the oceans, and he had us all in sobbing tears with the pictures he had of the polar bear and their devastating loss of their habitat. But Paul Nicklin, thank you, everybody. Look at that, the power of research. And Stewie, I'm going to be seeing you in New York next week. I can't wait.
We'll wrap it up with another comment from Bill Todd. He said, reefs are dying due to cruise ship pollution. The fish feed on the reef and have little food. The livelihood of the places dependent on divers are suffering. Chain reaction and heartbreaking. There you go, Bill. And when you say cruise ship pollution, I assume you mean what we were talking about before, which is refuse dumping, not just
the fuel that they're emitting into the ocean. I think the reefs dying and a lot of the pollution of the seas has come to be that, as I said before, I didn't look up the exact, regulations on and whether freighters are different from oil tankers or different from cruise ships, but I do believe that there are very few regulations in terms of dumping refuse out into the ocean. Thanks everybody for checking in. I wish I could see you all. It must be boring just to watch my face for this long a time, but I love it that you check in, and I learn something from you every time we do one of these live sessions. Have a great weekend. Talk to you next time.